Thank you all for taking the time to join us for this important discussion. I would like to extend a special thank you to the chair of our board, Prof. Njabulo Ndebele, as well as to all board members present today. A warm thanks to our acting chief executive, Prof. Vern Harris, all the way at the back. Vern, we can still see you. And last but certainly not least, we are honored to welcome our 22nd annual lecture speaker, Abdulrazak Gurna. Today's dialogue, entitled Where Do Africans Belong?, marks the fifth installment of our Critical Dialogue series and also serves as a precursor to the 22nd Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture. This dialogue seeks to explore the question of belonging through the lens of our shared humanity, focusing on how it has shaped the experiences of African people. In particular, it will examine how xenophobia, tribalism, and colonial legacies continue to influence contemporary notions of belonging for African communities, both locally and globally. According to the United Nations, since conflict erupted between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces, an estimated 20,000 people have been killed, and more than 10 million people have fled their homes in Sudan. Against the backdrop of violence in the DRC, 25.4 million people are facing famine, including 13.2 million children. 7.3 million people are currently displaced, while 3.7 of which are children. To make matters all the more devastating, the DRC is also now facing the rapid spread of the deadly Mpox virus. In light of all of this, I would like for us to please observe a moment of silence in honor of our brothers and sisters facing these persisting afflictions. In reflecting on today's discussion, I am reminded of a seminal passage from Cornel West and Bell Hooks' book, Breaking Bread, which encapsulates the essence of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership. The authors write, King was someone who would enter a church and always dialogue with whomever was there, regardless of what position they occupied. Why? Because King really believed not only did Black people have the capacity to change themselves in society, but that Black people are worthy of the highest forms of love and respect. Very few Black people and very few Black leaders really believe deeply in the humanity of Black people, believe in the capacity of Black people to achieve and their worthiness of love. Reflecting on this passage alongside the ongoing turmoil in the world has underscored the critical need to re-establish a strong sense of humanity among Black people. Grounding the revolution in love with a deep appreciation and care for one another must guide our collective pursuit for justice. The hope is that this convening would be the first step in the right direction. Now, to provide us with a deeper insight and to set the stage for today's discussion, I will now hand over to my brilliant boss, Sumaya Hendricks.
Thank you. As a Malay-colored South African whose maternal ancestors came to South Africa more than 250 years ago, and whose paternal ancestors are a concoction of Malay, Dutch, and Indian heritage, I too have grappled with this question of belonging, and has preoccupied me. It has preoccupied me when I studied abroad and got asked the question several times, are you really from South Africa? When I could hear that the answer South African was not satisfactory. This question has preoccupied me when I grew up in an Indian community and was told as a young child that I won't be able to marry an Indian boy because I was an Indian. This question has preoccupied me when a Scottish classmate of mine was very perplexed that someone who wore a headscarf could speak better English than them. But my reflection and introspection and engagement on this issue has come from a place of privilege and comfort. I have not had to escape my homeland to a foreign land where I am unwanted. I've not had to worry that in the middle of the night, my spaza shop might be burned down or raided. I've not had to live in fear that my child might fall sick and pass on because I'm not able to take them to the hospital just because I don't have the right documents. I've not had to feel the pain of unemployment because factories and shops nearby only want to employ undocumented foreign nationals because it's cheap labor. In South Africa, discussing issues of xenophobia and Afrophobia can be very polarizing and a very difficult space to navigate. On the one hand, you get extreme hatred, but on the other, you face such empathetic views that it can also be quite dismissive of people's lived experiences. We tried a few years ago at the foundation to have internal discussions and experience these views firsthand, and it almost left us at the foundation feeling unsure about how to contribute to this discussion. Now, the aim of the Critical Dialogue series is really to grapple with difficult but important conversation in a way that's not confrontational just in a performative manner, but really delving with questions that we too as a foundation are grappling with. Now, the panel discussions that will follow my remarks will really delve into these questions of that I raised and on the overall theme of where do Africans belong, and it will be skillfully moderated by Dr. Sebabatso. So thank you so much all for being here, and I look forward to navigating this important conversation with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samaya, for that comprehensive background. I will now outline the structure of today's engagement. So we will begin by having a 35-minute facilitated discussion, followed by a 60-minute Q&A session, and end off with some closing remarks from our chief executive. Before we begin, just a gentle reminder to please put your phones on silent. If you need the restrooms, they are on your left from reception. Now, before I welcome our facilitator and panel up to the front, I want to just share a bit of background on them as a way of honoring them. Today's facilitator is Dr. Sebabatso Manwedi Lesame, who is incomparable. She serves as Executive Director of Atlantic Fellows for Racial Equity, a fellowship program based at Columbia University for racial justice leaders from across the globe. AFRI is also an institutional partner of the foundation. She is author of Sudan's Southern Problem, Race, Rhetoric, and International Relations, 1961 to 1991, Palgrave Macmillan, 2019. As a historian of Africa, she has held a lectureship at the University of Oxford, and she has taught African history courses at Stanford and Fort Hare. At AFRI, she is the founding editor-in-chief of Moya, a literary publication devoted to exploring planetary blackness, and she has hosted the first 2 seasons of the podcast, Race Beyond Borders. Please join me. Thank you. Now, the first panelist I will invite to the front is this year's 22nd Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture Speaker and winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature 2021. He is the author of 10 novels, Memory of Departure, Pilgrim's Way, and Paradise, which are some of the shortlisted for the Booker Prize and the Whitbread Award. His books, Admiring Silence, By the Sea, were longlisted for the Booker Prize and shortlisted for the Los Angeles Times Book Award. Desertion, shortlisted for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, along with The Lost Gift, Gravelheart, and Afterlives, which was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for Fiction 2021, and longlisted for the Walter Scott Prize. He was Professor of English at the University of Kent and was a Man Booker Prize judge in 2016. Please help me in welcoming Abdul Razak Gurna. Thank you. The second panelist I will invite to the front is Manuel Mahale. They are a South African editor, feminist writer, and poet. They have been longlisted twice for the Sol Plaatje European Union Poetry Anthology Award. And their debut collection of poetry, Everything is a Deathly Flower, was published by Uhlanga in September 2019. The collection was shortlisted for the Ingrid Jonker Poetry Prize, later winning the 2020 Gena Lucie Prize for African Poetry. They currently serve as a research associate with the Center for Study of Race, Gender, and Class at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, our third and last panelist is Ayub Vuyo Mokoena. Vuyo, who normally frequents the foundation for our work on early childhood development, as he is an ECD principal and ECD forum chairperson. Today, he joins us as a Bickersdale community representative. He's also an imam and chairperson of the Bickersdale Muslim Association. Please join us. Dr. Sibabato, we are now in your capable hands.
Thanks, Samantha. Samantha is so generous. Let's clap for her. It's such a privilege to be here with you all today and to be in conversation with our extraordinary panel today about this urgent question. And I'd like to begin with the wisdom of a 2nd century Roman playwright of African descent, someone with complex histories and heritages like the ones we'll be discussing today. His name is Terence. And he is said to have said that I am a human being and nothing human is alien to me. The wisdom of that quote is, of course, so much of our discourse and our conversation around immigration, the refugee experience, otherness, and belonging centers on calling people who come from different lands aliens. And Terence reminds us that no one who's human is alien. But there's a second layer to the wisdom of Terence, and that's the fact that the various emotions and experiences that make up the full spectrum of this conversation around belonging, dispossession, and otherness is also human. The hatred is human. The fear, the love, the anxiety. And I want to ground our discussion today in the full humanity of this exploration. It's also a profoundly African way to begin a conversation, not so much with just the analysis. The statistics are scary. Nearly 700 people have been killed in South Africa since 1994 in xenophobic violence. Over 5,000 businesses and people's livelihoods have been destroyed as a result, and more importantly, over 130,000 people have been displaced as a result. But this conversation has a human face to it. And so I'd like to begin with the personal. And I'll start with you, Professor Abdul Razak, and ask you, how do you, as an African, arrive at this question of belonging?
Well, because we've seen other instances. Well, it's not a very big question, is it? I mean, it's an impossible question. How does one think of belonging? Everybody, I suspect everybody has a sense of this. Normally, ordinarily, it's where you're born. It's not always, though, that this remains uncontested. And I suppose one of the tragedies of the disruptions that have occurred, particularly to many societies in Africa, as a result of colonialism, as a result of independence, is a questioning or doubting, a kind of skepticism about what this means. Now, you'd have thought you might be able to say, I was born here, this is my country. But you actually can't say that. You can't say that for a variety of reasons, and none of them are straightforward. You can't say that because you look different. Sometimes you can't say that because there is a contestation of land or boundaries or movement and so on. Examples were mentioned earlier. The two, apparently, the ones that we remember now or that are in our faces, Sudan and the chaos that's going on there. I gather you've written a book about the South Sudan, so you know very well. But look how easily and how quickly we've forgotten the Eritrea-Ethiopian war and how many deaths that created and how much movement that created. And about what? About belonging, about who has a right to be here and who has a right to be there. I find it, honestly, simply impossible to respond to that question in a few sentences.
I appreciate that. Coming from Zanzibar, with the heritage that you have, Yemeni background, as well as various backgrounds, given what some people have called the racial fluidity of Zanzibar, I'm curious, you bring such complexity to your work around how identities, different people of different identities interact with one another, the waves of different conquest that have come upon Zanzibar. I'm curious what that's been like in your lived experience. How have you grappled with belonging?
I never thought of myself as anything else. And I suspect many people of my generation also did not think of themselves as anything else but Zanzibaris. And it was kind of a regular thing. People came from different places originally, ancestrally, even spoke different languages, were different religions. I have I could tell you, those of you who've been to Zanzibar probably still will find this is so, but certainly in my childhood, you could literally, like you sometimes can in parts of South Africa, you could walk down a street and you would pass 3 different mosques, all of them different sects. You would pass a Hindu temple, you would pass a Zoroastrian shrine, and there are all these people. And this is a ongoing thing, this business of people from different places traveling across the ocean and making a home there. But one of the things that did happen to many places, talking about belonging as well, but also talking about colonialism and independence, is the racialization of this idea of who is the person who belongs here. It's no longer a simple matter of what Maya was saying, I have 250-year history of here. You could have that, but you don't look right, so you don't belong. So this is what I mean about racialization. The racialization of nationality and the right to belong was a post-independence thing in our part of the world. So I know I have ancestors from Yemen, but I also have ancestors from other parts. And many people were in this situation, so much so that very often people did not know to name these ancestors in the sense of where do they come from. And it was only the pressure that was produced by this racialization that I'm talking about, that people had to rediscover then, where can I be safe? And then said, I think I have relatives in Dubai. I think I have relatives in India. And if I don't have relatives in all of those places, there is always Canada.
That's almost the perfect segue for Maneo Mohale. Johannesburg, born and bred, and I think she sometimes says, they sometimes say buttered. So Maneo, can you tell us about how you personally arrive at this question of belonging as an African and an African who's traversed to Canada?
Canada, a turtle island.
I didn't know she was anything to do with Canada.
I think I've always been a hybrid thing in thinking with and maybe in step with Homi K. Baba. Like I'm I've been a thing moving in between worlds, not just in between identities, in between nationalities, in between all kinds of things. But I think my lineage and my lineages reveal how fluid and porous any kind of fixed subject position of identity is. I don't believe in, I mean, it doesn't make sense. I'm not a woman or not a man. I identify as non-binary, but I mean, in English, but you know? But lately I've been thinking about the lineages that I feel very connected to. I'm from the East Rand of Johannesburg, like that's my root. And when I think about the history and also the presentness of that space, it feels very connected to my blood. On my father's side, I come from a lineage of armed resistance. I have people in my family that were part of MK. On my mother's side, and specifically through my grandfather, I have lineages in Zimbabwe. I have people in Bulawayo, Harare, Chegutu, and that kind of destroys that. On my father's side, Rabasoto, but my people come from Mohale's Hook, which is also really rare, that there's a space that I can kind of point onto a map that has my surname. But I mean, that area, Lesotho, was disrupted by so many wars. I think about Spriti's War. I think about the gun war. And before those, before the intense conflicts that happened in those spaces, the land was looked after by the Baputi, by the San, and the Basotho. So I have all of that in my blood. I think I've never had a rigid understanding of identity as being a queer person, as being someone who's had the immense privileges of moving across borders, of studying and living in so-called Canada on Turtle Island. I lived on Coast Salish lands as an uninvited guest and learned a lot about indigeneity and First Nations and land and identity there. And the relationship between settler colonies, because South Africa is a settler colony. So it was hard, and Canada still is. But I think I'm with Ntate here saying it's an impossible question to place oneself. But if I had to say, I'm from the East Rand. I'm like a babe from the East Rand.
What a colorful picture you've painted for us, Manel. Thank you. We'll return to some of the themes you raised. Imam Vuyo, it was a pleasure to meet you early in the week. And you have a lot of different commitments, but one that you have returned to and made publicly, and that's your commitment to the community of Bekkersdal. And I'm curious what where you are from does to how you arrive at this question of belonging as an African. What is your personal story?
You know, I'm a simple person, so the way you even put the question is even difficult, you know. I locate the question of where does the African belong through my observation of the African. My first encounter of an African was meeting an uncle who's a migrant worker. This uncle, as a migrant worker, is earning a living, but maybe is hiring a room from my father. And whenever this uncle goes to the street, you find he's meeting some derogatory words being referred to as a kwere, you know, an alien. So at the same time, you find there's an uncle Beki, maybe he's my neighbor. He's known for mugging people. He's known as a criminal, but he's more honored and respected because he's from that community, you know. So when you look at the African, the difficulty that they had to endure, you look at the fact that, you know, you come to learn early in your life that Africa is a mineral-laden land. But you look at the state of the African, you find that they cannot even find a space in the economic vehicle. And then through this observation, then I ask myself, where does the African belong? Because the land that he comes from cannot even give him security, you know? Because at the end of the day, when you look at the African, we say is the son of the soil. The soil, it means the African identifies with the land, you know? And the land, you take it like how you would take your parents, because your parents will give you security, the land does the same. Your parents will provide for you, the land does the same, you know? So I locate my question of where does the African belong on the experience of the difficulties that the African has come across.
What a profound observation. I mean, all the panelists are giving such thoughtful, rich responses. Your response, Ntatevoyo, makes me think of a poem that Maneo wrote called A House Called History. In it, they say, the ground hums and blood knows this ground. Speaking of soil. And Maneo, you talk about a multi-generational view of your own family's relationship to a piece of soil. And I know that artists and poets have the responsibility and duty to expand our imaginations and give us new language. But so often our metaphors for belonging are connected to rootedness, like trees. How might you begin to expand how we can think about belonging in ways that are not so zero-sum, that some people relate to this piece of land and others do not?
It's interesting that rootedness is like connected to a kind of staticness, but I don't think about life, especially when I think about plant life, I don't think about plant life as static. And when I think about roots, I think about, rhizomatic, I think about, all of the roots, all of the ways in which life touches each other in invisible places and in invisible networks. So I think I, as a poet that is deeply connected to nature and is reverent of nature, I think it teaches me a lot about belonging. Water doesn't know borders, has never known borders, doesn't move along bordered lines. And we are made of water, if I think about the most natural. But my work and what I've inherited as a poet of a lineage of poets is to ask good questions about the things that we think that we know. And identity is one of those things. Land is one of those things. Language is one of those things. Race, gender. But I don't know. I think I've always been a poet that likes to prod at a question and prod at the edges of a border and to reveal how useless a border is. Borders around bodies, around brains, around land, around contingents. So that's my answer.
I love the reference to water. And I think it connects so well to what you were saying, Professor Abdul Razak, about the Swahili coast and how Zanzibar and Tanganyika in the colonial period in Tanzania, perhaps in some of the post-independence period, was a place, a kind of melting pot that allowed for fluidity, movement, borderlessness. But it also came at a bit of a cost. We know the racial violence in Zanzibar in the 50s and the like. I wonder what you might say Zanzibar has to teach us about belonging.
Well, at the moment, it doesn't have anything to teach us because of the way that very idea of living together, as it were, has been squeezed. It's not gone. I mean, there is a human capacity for hanging on to good things. So it's not quite gone, but it has resulted in a huge population shift. Fortunately, a lot of the people, although I've mentioned Dubai, India, and Canada, which was a destination for many people, particularly of Indian origin, Canada, a lot of people just went across the channel and made a new life on mainland Tanzania or in Kenya or somewhere. So in other words, there is still that kind of living together going on in that part of East Africa. But it is also rather interestingly, it's not just Africa, because this exchange, this business, which has been going on for centuries, this transoceanic connection, actually also means there are a lot of Africans who live in South Arabia and in the Gulf. And it would be quite surprising if you don't know that area, how many people you will find there who say, for example, speak Swahili. Just the other day, I was in Qatar, and almost every, I know it's because of the richness of those countries that draws in migrant labor, but that's also part of a historical connection. I think every third person I met in Qatar was Kenyan and speaking Swahili and so on. But that's also part of the reality of today. You know, it's not just simply a naive kind of optimism about cultural exchange. That's where the money is. So people go there to work. At a time when those countries were poor, the money or prosperity was on the east coast of Africa. So they came there. You know, that's how it goes. People come and go, as human societies and human peoples have done forever. You find a life. What you now see African people going to Europe, and you see people from various parts of the South American continent going to the United States. That's how we've been for centuries, coming and going. To try and create these impenetrable barriers, as it were, only brings pain and tragedy.
A lot of the continent of Africa experiences tragedy and pain. It's one of the critical push factors for the immigration that's behind the discontent we're talking about. And I wonder, Prof, if there, you know, as an elder, as a historical writer, no, in Africa you are an elder. You do not apply for the position.
Right. I don't mind.
Okay, good.
Just making a comedy.
Okay. It's an honored position. You know, you have such rich insight that you capture so poignantly as an artist, a writer. I'm curious, what do you think is missing? You know, what should leaders on this continent be doing to make it more hospitable? Many of us flee our countries.
You do ask big questions.
It came with the job description. But we leave for war. We leave for famine. We leave because of economic hardship.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm just curious, as somebody who studies history and captures it in accessible ways.
Well, there are obvious answers and very complicated answers, because in the first instance, many of the nations of Africa are not true nations, to put it simply. And therefore, they're already unstable, broken, already quarreling amongst themselves and creating difficulties for each other. I mean, we can just name Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Sudan, etc. Everywhere you look, there are these, problems, difficulties. And these difficulties are difficulties that cause divisions. And the result of that is also a sort of oppressions within those nations. I would have thought that one of the push factors would be precisely the deprivations created by these divisions. We're told that the largest numbers of people who are traveling across the Sahara towards Europe are either from Eritrea or from the Sahel region. And these regions, as we know, are constantly at war. So I think that instability is one of the push. How do you stop that? I don't know. Even when it seems, I don't know the answer. If I did, I would announce it. But the answer is to do with human cruelty and human stupidity, amongst other things. And even when it seems that somebody has come through this unexpectedly, I'm thinking, for example, the Prime Minister, if he's still Prime Minister, of Ethiopia, who seemed like somebody who has come through speaking sense and talking in a way that is going to get round this constant disunity and disagreement. It turns out, for whatever reason, I don't know, aside from cruelty, stupidity, or being forced by his supporters to do so, it turns out that he's just doing the same thing that it seems every other prime minister, president, or emperor that we produce does. Fight somebody, lock up somebody else, etc. So I don't know. I think maybe we just have to be patient and keep saying that is unjust and that is wrong.
I'm with you. I think there are many reasons to lack a little bit of hope, but I appreciate this caution for patience. Tatavuyo, in a conversation we had earlier, you talked about multiple waves of immigration. There's something of a patience in what you were talking about, that somehow, from your perspective, in an earlier period, South Africa was able to absorb immigrants from other African countries in ways that weren't contentious and contested like today. And that something shifted. Do you want to talk about those waves? And perhaps there's something in the circumstances that could begin to help us get at some of these answers.
I'm still young as well. So, when the first wave happened, in 16, what? That was the first wave, actually. We're not looking at the wave of now. The first wave came that time. And this one had adverse, effects on us. It had a very negative effect because this is where we were dispossessed, colonized, and dehumanized as well, But then the same settler community was able to establish an economic community as well. It was able to extract the minerals and provide economy. So as such, then you hear that in the early 1900s, there was the Johannesburg gold rush. And then those migrants who came at that time, they were here for the sole purpose of putting bread on the table. So there was no focus that they had except to better their own lives. And as such, they wouldn't impact those whom they found in that country except to contribute towards their economic well-being. And then the time went. You can hear even Ntateyu Masekela in Stimela, he tells us that there's a train that comes from Zimbabwe, from Malawi. All these migrant workers were coming so that they can be part of the greater community. At that time, we didn't identify each other based on the borders. We identified each other according to how Steve Biko identified us. That being black is not a matter of your skin pigmentation. Being black is actually the disadvantaged position that you are at. So whenever you came into the country, no matter where you came from, we look at you first as a human, and then as such, those migrants from the 50s, they came into the country as well, contributing positively. But then you look at about 2 decades back. Now, the ones who are coming, remember, if you are a migrant, you are not leaving your country because you want to go and enjoy South Africa. How can you come and enjoy a country with a murder rate that is so high, a crime rate that is so high? There's no enjoyment. You are coming to make yourself, to get a way of survival. And it's because of our African leaders, they are not honest, So if we are to find our solution, our African leaders need to be human first. And they need to go and learn either the Bible or whatever and get that verse that says, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Because you are a president, you wouldn't like to migrate and go and seek for your livings elsewhere. You would want to be the person who's taken care, but your own people are leaving the country. So these waves of immigrants, they continued until, let's say, 2 decades back. So now you find that this is a new At first, it was concentrated mainly from the African migrants, but then went Asia. Europe was always a migrant community in South Africa. That one we must not forget, because when we speak about migrants, we speak about Africans. But the migrants who have us, who are controlling us, they are mostly from Europe. So like that, this wave now that came in the last 2 decades, it also was pursuing its own economic well-being, but it didn't mind doing that at the expense of the people of the country. They didn't take away any business or any money from anyone, because the way they are running the tech shops is not the system that we used. You could have walked in the olden days. You could walk 3 kilometers to reach a place where you can secure something to eat. But now every 200 meters in a township, you meet a spaza shop. So it means that they have come up with their own structure, So like that, they are still pursuing the same thing. But now they are also encroaching into those fields that we need to empower our own people. Now, they are not like the first wave of migrants where labor was needed. Those places were known as labor sending places. So now we are no longer at that stage. There's enough labor in the country already, So as much as the first wave was about their own economic well-being without even taking away from the citizen community. But what is happening currently is not the same thing. The wave that is here currently, it is engaging in things that we never knew the foreign community to engage in: selling drugs, in being part of selling alcohol. Alcohol is a problem in our country. Whether you can paint it otherwise, but alcohol is a problem in our country. You find that also our children are exposed to teenage pregnancy, falling victim to the same people. You find that our matriculants cannot access entry-level jobs like your restaurant job, like your garage job, because now they have been taken. But you must remember that this is not only the migrant community that is forcing this thing. It is giving a door, and the people of this country themselves, they are opening that door, because it's not a migrant worker who comes and hires themselves at the restaurant or a garage, but the one who's found in this country, they are opening that room. So like that, the waves of migrants have had different impacts. They were good at first, but currently they are not so good. They might be good for them, but not good for everyone.
Thanks for that. I think you're giving voice to the kinds of grievances that people are making, certainly in Bekkersdal, but also in communities all across the country. And we can, of course, sit and analyze, well, is this scapegoating or not? But it's very much a lived experience and perspective of people. So I really appreciate you giving voice to that. As we begin to conclude this part, I have 2 more questions. One for you, Manel, about, so much of your advocacy work is centered on a different axis of belonging, and that's the question of sexuality in Africa. I'm curious, what do you think we're missing in this conversation from that lens?
Oh, yeah, you're giving us all the hard ones. Yeah, gee whiz. Oh my God. I think being queer and South African also is a unique sort of spot. We have such a beautiful constitution that was written in blood, that was written in such indefinable and uncontainable decades, almost centuries of struggle. And on the axis of sexuality, the fact that I can be here in my land of birth, in my land of my ancestors, and I can effectively marry and live in partnership and live in a kind of safety, which is always contingent on class, which is always contingent on position, so many things. But I enjoy an incredible amount of safety because of my class position, even being a queer person. But I can't think and stop thinking about my siblings in Uganda, for example, who are facing unbelievably draconian penalties for the privileges that I enjoy as a queer person. And this is a thread that we can draw all over the continent. But I'm not also being raised in history and being having studied history, that it would be remiss of me to just say that this is a condition that emerges without context. That so many of the laws that we are subject to are sodomy laws that were written by the British, that we are still suffering from, that the impact of colonialism is sprawling and complex and messy over our sexual and intimate lives, over our political realities, that it's not about what happens under closed doors and behind curtains, but it really is about what categories of human are allowed the full spectrum of protection and life. And so much of the legacy of exploitation, so much of the legacy of colonialism. I was just reading a poem right now, written by Ndate Don Matera in a Zanian love song, in which he kind of draws such a beautiful thread from the exploitation and the theft of gold from the ground to power structures like patriarchy, in which we're starting to see the fruits being bared, in which young teenage girls are the ones that are most vulnerable. And at least in this country, even with our most beautiful constitution, that for a very large part of my work, I was involved on the hate crimes bill. And that work involved so much harrowing work with communities about violence and death that queer and trans people from all over are subjected to. And still the most vulnerable amongst us are Black, queer, trans, disabled, etc., Africans. And I can't divorce the experiences and oppressions and the joys that queer people experience in Africa from our history. And South Africa, we have a rich, beautiful history of struggle that explains and is a beautiful story about why our constitution sounds the way it does. But there's a large gap between the words and the reality.
Thanks for that, Manel. Professor Abdul Razak, I'd like to give you the last word in this part of the discussion, and really drawing on the themes of solidarity that Manel began to raise, and the through lines of thinking deeply about the afterlives of colonialism, which of course is a central theme of your own work. Is there a way to disentangle ourselves from what Europeans did to us?
Yes, I think so. I'm quite, on the whole, optimistic, even if at times I've sounded not, but I am optimistic. And the ways of doing it is, I think, to try to understand the experience, which I think is happening all around. It's not only happening for those who are shall we say, the recipient of this subjection, but it's also happening in the formerly colonial or empire nations too. Not that you'd notice always, but it is happening. But it's much more important, I think, that we, when I say we, and this is why I'm thinking solidarity, we who have experienced European colonialism, and it's not just Africans, are able to reflect on this and to speak about it and to name, as it were, the injustice of it and to understand it. Because to understand it is also, in a way, to understand the predicament that we find ourselves in. We can speak about this is as a result of colonialism, and I completely understand what you're talking about. But we can't stop there. You know, it can't be just trying to pinpoint the source of this or that horrible law. We don't, so many nations in Africa in particular have simply taken over the legal systems of colonialism and found that they work. They work in order to remain in power and to pursue their objectives. So we have to keep saying, no, we can't do it this way. We have to be more aware. We have to understand, and so on. So we just have to keep talking and doing if we can, if you're able to, without getting hurt. But, but I think we are making progress.
Thank you for that
Slowly.
optimistic note. Yes. I'd like to open it up to the audience. I'm seeing a few hands, starting with the gentleman over here. And I'll go to the lady with the headscarf next, and the gentleman in the fourth row after.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the amazing, amazing panel. If you don't mind, I'm going to read my question because I fear that I might forget some of the points that I wanted to ask. So I grew up in the inner city of Joburg, a very diverse place, and I found myself relating to Imam Vuyo Mokoena as he relates his first encounter of an African through a migrant. I also grew up as a kid where my friends were migrants or coming from migrant families and having so many things we could relate to with each other. But during one of the many unfortunate xenophobic attacks, I was left questioning my identity. I would often go to school, and those friends wouldn't come to school with fears of being attacked, and they would obviously miss a lot of school time. Or I would be called an immigrant myself because, I would be called an immigrant myself, even though I knew that my mom is Tswana and my dad is Xhosa. In fact, as a young boy in high school, I was almost attacked because I didn't know what an elbow was in isiZulu. So when the xenophobic attacks came, I was perplexed because I saw myself and my friends, and I couldn't see any difference because we shared so much together. And they took me to their houses, their homes, and we shared their food and everything. And so my question essentially is, how do you find belonging as an African where you relate so much and you relate so much closer to those being discriminated upon than where you technically should belong, but are also the instigators of that specific violence?
Wow, thank you for that question. Can you tell us your name? Malaika. Thank you, Malaika, for that question. Tatavuya, I'd like to invite you to respond to Malaika's question.
But you must always be reminded that you are human first before you are anything else. And if you can locate your humanity, then you will be able to locate others as well, no matter where they come from. Because, we treat each other according to race, according to our borders. But all of us sitting here, what determines who we are is our actions. You are your own actions, irrespective of where you come from. Because the same things that we might be complaining that, the foreign nationals are doing that are wrong, they apply to all the other people. It's not that when a crime is committed by a foreigner, it has more weight than someone who is not a foreigner. So, you first have to locate your own humanity and treat others as humans. So that even when you are confronted with xenophobic attacks, you might be able to call those who are doing such things and try to teach them that you need to find your humanity first. Because the thing is that it's just that, people who always have this problem are people who we say they are a Bene Plus, They've never traveled anywhere. They are only located in one area. Because if you travel, you'll appreciate human beings from all the diverse walks of life. And if you travel, you'll be able to appreciate that, it's not really the person that is from which country that will be of benefit to you. Because how many children grew up in houses where your own uncle will be sexually abusing you? whether be molestation or what. But this is your own blood and family. And then at the same time, you find that there is a total stranger who understands your plight and they help you, you know. So you always have to locate your own humanity in order to address this issue here. Because you yourself, where do you belong? You don't really belong to the borders of South Africa. It's just your geographical location. But you belong to everyone. As long as you can contribute good towards the other person, that's where you belong. If you contribute bad towards the person, you belong in jail. That's simple.
We'll take a couple of questions together. The lady over here, the gentleman over there, and then the gentleman with the hat.
Thank you very much. This is Bitumelo Monoketsi, the chairperson of the Foundation for African Royals and Bright Star Foundation. This is a very interesting topic. We actually had a heritage dialogue on identity on Tuesday. Ke Motswana. I love the panel that you have. They really triggered a lot of things from me. Interestingly, I was in Zanzibar early this year, and I met somebody that looked just like me. And I asked a lot of questions, only to be led to the Hadzabe tribe somewhere in Tanzania. I'm going back to Arusha to find out where I really come from. And I suggest that all of us here has to come to a point where you forget the borders and realize that we are all one. We are all one from one womb. My own will be the beauty of what's happening here today. Is there a way that it can be extended? Instead of us making a lot of small, great work out there, can we combine it? Because in our own, we had monarchy from most African countries, and all the 9 provinces were represented by kings, queens, chiefs, and tribal authorities. And the question was, who are we? What is your identity? It left a bitter taste because apartheid has really done worst, not just to South Africans, but to the whole of Africa. The social ills that we are all crying about, that Sir here spoke about, it's simply because of the aftermath and the effects of apartheid that we as Africans are not ready to deal with. And those colonizers are not also really willing to sit on the table and come to see the hemorrhage of what has really happened and how it's affecting us and how it's going to continue to affect generations to come because we are not ready. Can we come to a dialogue where we leave politics behind and as human beings, one by one, start to search deep within our own individual hearts to say, what part am I playing in this? What am I doing? How far can my fear take me? Can I stand out there and challenge a dialogue where African countries meet, where crime meets with humanity, where compassion meets with hatred? And we come to a point where we all want to say we want to do something. Can we make the cycle bigger? And can this whole panel and team here join us in our next dialogue, because the whole of Africa is now talking? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mabutumelo. There with the jacket.
Thank you for a wonderful panel, Christian here. Maneo, thank you so much for picking up on the topic of queerness. I think it's important to recognize what's happening in Uganda and elsewhere as a result of colonial legacies, but also contemporary interference from, for instance, American right-wing groups and so forth. Could you speak a little bit more on the notion, because so much of it revolves around the discourse of being queer is un-African. And, yes, we have laws here, we have constitutional protections, but in so many other countries in Africa, it's seen as un-African and somehow, should be divorced from our African identity. Could you speak a bit more about that, please?
Thank you so much. We'll take one more. The gentleman with the hat, and then I'm going to come to this side of the room after Maneo and others respond.
Oh, sorry.
You can join the group. You can be next.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. What I appreciated about the panel is that it gestures towards different narratives of belonging. And what I appreciate about literature is that it lends itself towards the deepening and the shaping of our own narratives. And I was wondering if, Prof. Gurna, if you would be able to expand on some of the narrative threads that have connected your literature over the years, and also how your sense of narrative has evolved since you started writing to where you are right now.
Thanks. Let me ask Mano and Prof. Gurner to respond, and then you can give the gentleman the mic. And I'm going to come to the lady over here and the gentleman there.
That's a fantastic question. Thank you for it. I think I approach the bigoted idea that homosexuality, queerness, other ways of being, alternative ways. Like English is so poor. But is un-African the notion? I think the first impulse is to point to our history, to say, look at our pre-colonial history and say, there are all of these ways of being, all of these otherwise ways of being before we had deeply Christian ways imposed upon ourselves. There's a really fantastic book by Natasha Erlang that I've been reading called Convening Black Intimacy, where she tracks what she calls Christianity's institutional thickness and she kind of makes the argument that we underestimate the ways in which Christianity not just impacted the ways that we understand our identities, but that it impacted literacy, like who got to learn how to read, who got to be in public life, who got to be a person. And when we address that, so this is a very long way of getting to this question. I subscribe to a notion that queerness is timeless, that we exist in the future and the past. I'm also a huge proponent of a theorist called Jose Esteban Munoz, who says that queer people are not yet here, that we are agents of the future, that by being and loving otherwise and imagining lives and loves otherwise, that we are already we are bringing the future towards us. We're not yet, but we are. In a deeply contradictory space. I like that idea so much better than pointing to the past and bringing my ancestors up towards me to account towards people who have a really bigoted and very narrow idea of what constitutes as African. Also, as maybe a mischievous way of like poking at the question too, that it's just like, so what if queerness isn't African? Okay. I was born on this soil. I'm an African and I'm queer. So I destroy that just by being here. And all of my siblings, in all of our wonderful colors and shades and shapes and ways of destroying and subverting and escaping all of the fugitive ways of heteronormativity, saying that there are only two genders, that you can only marry a man and a woman, etc., etc. That's never been true at any point in history in which everybody is like that. So I think just trouble the things. It's wrong. It's not true. I'm here. I'm African. Ow. I'm queer. So yes, yeah.
Well, sir, thank you for that very generous invitation, but I don't think we have time for me to answer you fully. But I appreciate that it indicates that you were interested, and I don't want to kind of spurn the invitation. But I would say that a writer, I'm sure there's several here, the writer finds his or her subject. We just heard an example right there. Or if you like, the subject finds you, and then the writer has to find ways of engaging with that and making it public in a sense, so that it's both plausible and also palatable in a sense, so that people can partake of it and gain something from it or enjoy it even, which is probably the primary thing about. Or the primary reason we go to literature. Really, I think that rather than that we go there to have our wounds scratched and whatever, but it's pleasure. If it doesn't work as pleasure, after page 15, you put the book down. So pleasure and the things that are actually kind of nagging you, That, it seems to me, are the primary motives and impulses.
A gentleman there, and then there's a lady here with the headscarf.
Yeah, thank you.
So sorry. And then just the lady with the sash. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. My name is Frank Asimbo. I'm the founding chairperson of the Congolese diaspora for Nelson Mandela Legacy. Let's be honest, guys. The topic around identity and the sense of belonging are useless. Let me tell you straight, useless. Because of what? 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in front of my television, TV, post, when in one of the American universities, a professor, a lady professor, a female one, because there was a report over the massacres of Palestinians by the Jewish people. And that professor from one of the American universities says that wars around the world are not acts of distraction. No. They are an act of recycling. They are recycling people. You die here, you're gone. As long as you are African, Palestinian, and other nationalities around the world, we don't have identity. So, the big question is around that philosophy, that ideology created by American people, I suppose. We are in trouble because the same logic, we can say, we've got foreigners problem, whatever. Let South African kill foreigners, don't worry about that. It is just an act of recycling. They are recycling those foreigners. Some of them, they are going to become a plant somewhere, they are going to nourish the plants and animals somewhere, according to our philosophies. So, especially we Congolese people, oh, Mandela, Congolese, oh. Do not think that we are here because we went to university and we learn a lot. But the problem is we don't belong to our own country. They are fabricating other ideologies and
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Akila. Sorry. I'm not really fancy with words and I don't really have a background, but I was just thinking and reflecting in, I'm not on exactly the same page by our previous speaker, but is it bad to have a sense of identity? Is it bad to want to belong somewhere? He touched on the Palestinian struggle. They want their land. They deserve their land. I'm a social worker. So we were working in a school and they were talking about Heritage Day and they wanted to have a function when they invited different societies with different heritages because the teacher said, students don't have an identity and they are seeking that and they are going to gangsterism. It's just like their nature to want to belong somewhere. I don't agree that, everyone should belong everywhere and you're first human, of course, but is it a bad thing to want to belong to a community? I'm Cape Malay in my culture, right? And there's beauty in that. Doesn't mean I'm going to exclude other people or discriminate towards them, but is it their beauty in wanting to belong and wanting to find identity so that I don't feel like oh no, I should just be no there, no here. Can't it take place simultaneously?
Thanks for that. I think you're raising that question of how this conversation can get to extremes, that, oh, we're all human, so we don't have to belong somewhere, but actually there are pieces of land that people belong to. How do we make sense of that? I wonder if, Prof, I could give you that impossible question to respond to.
No, it's down.
Okay, you can go.
Okay. No, I don't think there's anything wrong at all. In fact, it's impossible not to have that sense. I said that when I was growing up, and still today, I'm a Zanzibari. But it doesn't mean that that's, if circumstances don't allow you to actually exercise that sense, and you have to go somewhere else, it doesn't mean you don't belong there as well. And you may, in fact, even choose after you've gone there to go and belong somewhere else. What we have to understand, I think, in addition to the almost a sort of the primal need to be able to articulate the sense of I belong there, is that I can also belong somewhere else if it becomes necessary to do so. You cite the Palestinians deserve their own land. Of course they do. It's because they're denied their own land. It's not because Palestinians want to stay in Palestine, or all of them, because a lot of them don't. They want to seek a living elsewhere. They live all over the world. But they will say, I'm Palestinian. So that idea of belonging does not necessarily mean you got your feet on that piece of soil, but that you recognize that that is a connection you don't wish to be refused.
Prof, can I also jump in, I guess, just on this, because it's such a beautiful question. I'm reminded of two pieces of text or guiding principles that are precious to me. You're a person through other people. A person is a person through other people. And James Baldwin says that every bombed village is my homeland. And I think that identity is useful in so far as it connects you to a space and it also connects you to people. I think identity is only not just useful, but I think beautiful, expansive, and generative insofar as it answers or it reaches towards the answer of who am I, but who am I to you? Who am I for you? Who are you to me? And from there, and citing Palestine is also such a beautiful example that it's not a question of belonging without power, and it's not a question of belonging without exploitation and oppression. There's a group of people that believe that they are entitled to the land, but Palestinians will then say, watch how they treat the land. Watch how the people that are from the land treat the land and take care of the land, and watch the ways in which people that are not from this particular land but lay claim to this land, watch how they treat this land. So I think identity is deeply useful, but only insofar as it connects us to people and sites and points of resistance, struggle, and growth.
Yeah. There were a few hands at the back. So sorry. Yes, Ned.
So if I may come in,
Yes.
just a short thing. You know, as much as just to tap into what Akila said, that those who identify more with the humanity rather than the title of the land is because they've experienced those who took identity as a right to oppress others, who use their own identity to do all kind of evil things to others, because by virtue of them being identified as this superior race or species, they were always treating the others as inferior, using their identity to oppress the others. So this is what we are talking about. But it's not wrong for you to maintain your own identity.
Thank you for that clarification about how do you use your identity. There are a few people at the back who've been
I
waving.
have the microphone. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Thanks to the panelists. I am working on a book on identity. I went to school in the US for 10 years. And because they couldn't pronounce my name, I decided I don't belong there. I got the education and came home. By the way, I used to carry South African placards, free South Africa, as a student at UCLA. I went back home to find, because my name was part of who I was. And if you can't care to even just call me, what is your name? And when I say my name, you're who? I went home. I'm from Kenya, Professor, next to you. And congratulations on having a Zanzibari woman president. That's identity. And that would never have happened if we didn't continue to connect. Please leave politics out of identity. It doesn't help. I've been in this country for 15 years. Having carried, I'm actually going to look for Ramaphosa. I want to be a South African. Because I did carry, and I was part of the writing of the South African Constitution. And I identify 15 years in this country, and I'm treated like trash. But that doesn't bother me, because I know who I am. And the people I link with and empower and we connect, that's who I am. And I don't care what politics calls me. And I do not subject to politics. So if Africa wants to be united, by the way, it can't, because the foreign interests in Africa will not let us be free. And so you, wherever you are, please embrace your neighbor. Please just be human. That's who we are, human. Instead of, I don't know which clan, those are politics. Your neighbor, you are your neighbor. That's the African saying. I am because you are. Where is that? I am because you are. Thank you.
Mama, before. Sorry, Mama, before.
I want you to discriminate when I say my name. I want you to just remember that I am this one. Thank you.
There's a gentleman over here who had his hand up with the glasses. Yeah.
It occurs to me that maybe we haven't yet a clear reason for asking the question. And I say this because for some of us, not all, but for some of us, I think of myself, for example, you know, I grew up raised as a colored. I grew up in Cape Town, but I don't hanker after a colored identity. There's no piece of colored Stania somewhere in the Karoo or where a plot of land that I'm claiming title to. No. It doesn't matter so much to me. Of course, it matters what happened to my parents and what if ultimately how that impacted me, because they were raised as colored and they lived that experience. And of course, I inherit that. But I think there must be some more fundamental reason why we ask these questions, why we probe, why you, Professor Godna, are directing us to these deeper and further conversations about what exactly is implicated in this question. And it would seem to me, Imam Mokoena, you yourself have referred to this, that this current wave of migration into the country is different from what you've experienced before, historically. But we are not getting to grips with what the implication of that is. All we are prepared to comment on, it would seem, is the apparent division, the apparent unhappiness, the lived experience of especially working class people in our townships, because they bear the brunt of this, and they are invariably the people who are drawn into this. We forget, for example, that there are other forms of foreign exploitation, of foreigners coming to our country. People who are allowed to repatriate dividends, for example, the British, the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians. Our government still hasn't put its hand up to respond to those issues. And in the same way, we must start a dialogue about what exactly it means for the people the Africans in our midst, and especially Africans, because they bear the brunt of the anger of our communities when they see this ostensible joblessness that results from this inward immigration. So I think we need to start asking the kind of questions: what will appease them? What will give meaning to our claimed humanity and this famous constitution that we have? If we can't answer the questions that they are facing, the migrants who come to our country and were treated the way they are, if we don't have a solution for that, or if we're at least not able to start offering those solutions and push our government to no longer abdicate its responsibilities to help us find the answers to those questions, then I'm afraid there's no point in discussing this, because as I say, there's no piece of colored Stania that I'm after.
Thank you for that. And the gentleman over here with the black and white jacket. We'll take one more hand from the lady in the red and open up for responses.
Thank you very much. My name is Mafule. I'm delighted and honored to be here. I think this conversation, to an extent, is a heavy one, but equally is much more needed and necessary. So I grappled with this question for some time as an archaeologist, and I had learned then in my studies till masters that we share a common ancestor, and Africa is the cradle of humankind. And there's empirical scientific evidence to support that. As we advance this conversation, then the fundamental question becomes, throughout history, we, particularly in the context of Africa, we were exploited, culturally exterminated, but fundamentally because of the question of values. There was a group of people who were taught values of hatred, and they advanced them to ostracize us and many other people. So my fundamental question as we move to a place of pragmatism, maybe others even did share on this, that how do we move forward from here? How do we teach society new values, values that will heal, values that will make us understand that we belong together, that we are one human race? Because we have always been one human race until someone said, no, we are not. So from here to change, how do we pragmatically take this to the whole of society? It's what I would wish our beautiful, brilliant panelists to entertain and give perspective, because it's urgent and it's much needed to heal the world as a whole. In a nutshell, I'm grateful. And I am a student of Prof. Njavulo, who says we should learn to live in disagreement. Thank you, Father, and farewell. Tango.
And there's the lady with the hand up there, and we'll open up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Utembeli Mguni, and if it's not obvious already, I am a Miss World South Africa top 10 finalist. I am not only representing Miss World South Africa, I am also the founder of an initiative called Engineering Teen Edge. And thank you very much for this evening. This has been very insightful. I couldn't have imagined a better panel than all four of you, sorry. And every time each of one of you spoke, I just felt so connected to you in the most random ways that I can't even begin to explain. For example, I have been learning Swahili for a year now on Duolingo, and all I can say is Jina langu ni Tembelihle. And I'm learning, I'm trying. I am also born and raised in the East Rand of Gauteng. And I don't know if you know, but Ekurhuleni means place of peace. And every time you spoke, I just felt so much peace in the room, Maneo. I don't know how to explain it. I just a feeling, a connection it might be. And to you, Mr. Mokoena, is my question, actually. So as the founder of Engineering Teen Edge, it is an initiative that I started to try and bridge the gap of engineering skills within our youth of South Africa. And I too am a prospective electrical engineer at the University of Johannesburg. I am also an award-winning engineering mentor. And I have found that whenever I visit schools and townships and people that, you can see that there is a historical struggle here. It is not new, it is not recent, it has been there for years. And I stand here with so much emotion because it brings me to tears every time I go to my communities. And I'm proud to say that I am from the East Rand, but I'm also not. So my question to you, because I am still learning and I came here to learn and to absorb as much knowledge as I could, is how do I take my initiative and take this to a level that is really going to make a positive and a meaningful impact in my community?
Thank you, Miss World, South Africa. No, I'm saying this because you are going to win the title. Yeah. So, no man is an island. Yeah, so you need support. You need someone to hold you with their hand, Currently, at least our Minister of Education is less than 60 years old. She's still young. I think she's still receptive. I think these are the people we need to make contact with, so that we can show them our vision. Because I myself am an SGB chairperson, actually. And it's a township school. But my attitude is that in the next 3 years, children from town must come to the township and study in that school, because it's really a matter of honesty. Hey, our government, it has damaged our minds. Corruption is found through all the spheres. And even in the education sector, which is our hope, actually. I always tell my children that, look at me, I'm from the township. I don't have grandfathers who were industry captains, who were economically viable, who are doctors. The inheritance I'm leaving you is for you to go and finish your matric. That's the inheritance I'm leaving you with. So education is something that we need to invest in. So I can tell you that you should be what you want your children to be. You need to make sure that you consult with the relevant stakeholders. There are many people who want to help young children to become engineers. There are many people who want to see a greater future for our children. The most important thing is that you've taken them out from the streets. But I would tell you that let us contact these people in the highest offices. It's just a minister by title, but it's a human just like me and you. And if you are driven and your plight is sincere and you are going towards the right direction, you will get support. So just try to make sure that you find the relevant partners who will accompany you. Don't take people off the night because they will make you get lost on the road. Thank you.
We've got about 5 minutes left, and I think we can take 2 questions. Yes, sorry. Please go ahead. Let's have responses first, and then we'll take a final round.
I think we should get Njabula to answer that question, since you've been teaching him these things.
What is the question?
There were many things said, and I want to hear the question again, so I can be sure that I'm answering what is being asked.
But to advance this work, which is very important, and respecting your inputs, I think it's a question seeking guidance to say, how do we go back to our communities, those of us who are engaged, to do this and advance it? And particularly also maybe even involving government in a nutshell. Thank you very much.
I think you've complicated the question, but anyway.
Yeah, the question has been complicated because if you ask what is my community, I can't say I can't tell you what it is because I have been throughout my life traveled a lot, and I've lived in different countries, as well as being a South African. And I was born not too far from here in what used to be the Western Native Township. It's now Nuclear. We were driven out of there. I ended up in the East Rand in Niger. Later on, we were driven out of there again from Charterstone location. They created Duduza. And then Duduza is now part of a huge metropolis of what's Ruleni. And I'm not sure that, but what always touches me is if I go back to Duduza, people who were moved from Charterstone location to Duduza, maybe they may be scattered, but they still look for one another and create that community. In the similarly, many people who were moved from Western Native Township, they were got to Moroka, in Rockville, and so on. They still hold on to where they've come from. So the fact that you are moved does not necessarily remove you from where you have been, because you carry where you have been with you all the time. And so you might have people who have, actually it's very fascinating for me to say, a scholar from West once came to me in the office at UCT and put something in my mouth and took a specimen. And then a couple of weeks later, they came back and said, do you know, you have a perfect match in the DRC. So I have relatives in the DRC that I don't know, and but that information connected me deeply to the DRC, where I've never been, because there's a sort of a blood connection that has been established, and so where my moving around has made me a diffuse South African, because I'm part of everywhere where I've been. And I feel very emotional about Lesotho because I've lived there more than 20 years, had a wife and children and everything, and relatives out there. So I feel I belong to a bigger world than the world I was born from or in. And so my sense of belonging makes me feel open to different kinds of experiences. I'm not afraid to meet people I haven't met before and to share experiences with them. So I guess I don't know if I've actually answered the question because I've forgotten. But well, thank you very much.
It's really strange.
It's wonderful, Prof, because I think that you have. I was just listening to you. I was like, oh, you have. In listening to you, that they chart this history of displacement and moving and belonging and migration, what I heard was find your people and get organized. I think it's displacement feels as if something that is more and more and more a feature and a pattern of the future and the present. And no one is immune, I don't think. Yes, you might be insulated by power and privilege, but what is afflicting a vulnerable community today might afflict you tomorrow. But I'm hearing from Ndate that find your people, remember your people, hold on to your people, and organize. That's the lesson that I learned from people like Ruth Wilson Gilmore, that the only way that we are going to do anything is if we find our people and we get organized. And organization can look like anything. And our mothers know how to do this almost instinctively. I'm thinking about this dog fan. We know how to take care of each other. But I think that to do so, the pattern of the future, the imprint of survival is find your people, hold on to your people, and get organized.
I'm getting signals that it is time to close. And so I would like to give Prof the final word. So many questions have been and reflections from various members of the audience have been raised. I wonder how you might close this question of belonging, especially the questions about the usefulness of conversation.
Well, I mean, I think Jabulo should have been on the panel here. His words, his description of his sense of belonging, which is multiple, yet nonetheless deeply felt on every occasion, all these places. Now, that seems to me to be a way in which we can understand the kind of way it happens, the kind of inevitable disruptions that occur in communities and in people's lives. In this case, it's apartheid. In other cases, as we were talking earlier, it's because of deprivation or need. Or indeed, it might be as a result of ambition, wanting self-fulfillment, all of these things that lead to dispersals, that lead to displacement, or that lead to just decisions to go. We don't always ask. We assume we know the reasons why these crowds of people are leaving their countries. Well, in some cases, we do know. We do know why people are leaving Afghanistan or are leaving Kurdistan. We know why Syrians try to get away from. We know people are really leaving because they're fleeing for their lives. And there's unarguable. There's nothing you can do. Your life is at risk. You got to go. But there are many other people who leave for complicated reasons. And we don't always know these reasons. We assume we do, but we don't. What we do know is that people leave for a reason. As you were saying earlier, they don't say, I'm going there because I'm really happy here, but nonetheless, I'm leaving. You leave because you're not, because things are difficult. So it's important to both to be sympathetic or empathetic to these movements and the reasons for it. And indeed, of course, it's always a good thing to be empathetic and sympathetic. Inevitably, there are barriers, there are skepticisms, there are misunderstandings, and so on. How do we get around it, was your question, who didn't get your answer from Jabulo. Well, we get around it by doing what we're doing. Talk it through, talk. Keep talking, writing, speaking, singing, dancing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, audience, for your deep engagement. Thank you, panel, for your incredible, thoughtful responses. And thank you, Sumaya and team, for having us.
Wow. Another round of applause for our panelists. I think in trying to curate this panel and plan for this dialogue, I don't think any of us would have imagined the powerful insights that would come from bringing all these different people together. So, wow, thank you so much for that emotive and robust discussion. Also, thank you to the audience members for participating. Before we move on to the closing remarks, first I'd like to say you are welcome to go back to your seats. Thank you again. Just a few notes before we go back to, we continue with our closing remarks. Just to note, there's a prayer room once you go downstairs on your left for anyone who would like to use those facilities. I would like to then also just let people know after the finger foods that we will have following our convening, there will be a book signing from 7 right outside the auditorium. Now, this will be one of the last engagements we have with our acting chief executive, Prof. Vern Harris. So I would like to formally say that it has sincerely been a great honor to have worked with you, learned from you, and spent a little bit of my life's journey with you. You have been an exceptional leader and an overall outstanding human being. Please help me in welcoming our Prof. Chief Executive Vern Harris.
No, thanks very much. I said to the team, you don't want an old white man to come and have the last word here. But now I know why you insisted that I had to give the vote of thanks. Sebabatso, where are you now? Thank you for facilitating so brilliantly. So many questions bouncing in my head, and I don't have any closing words of wisdom. But maybe just to note that it is Mum Winnie's birthday today. And it's a question for us all. Where does Mum Winnie's story belong in the story of our country? And just to share with you, I gave a guided tour to Prof. Gunnar and Denise, his partner, this afternoon. Mum Winnie's personal archive is here. We've been providing a service just assisting to process her papers. And it is a question, where does that archive belong? Literally, but in other senses as well. So thinking of her and her contributions to making a Nelson Mandela Center of Memory possible. Thanks so much for coming. Appreciate it.
Short and sweet. Okay, thank you everyone once again. We can now close the session. Food will also be served downstairs, straight ahead. And yeah, thank you again.